605 BC. The banks of the Euphrates are choked with the bodies of tens of thousands of Egyptian soldiers, their blood seeping into the ancient dust. Standing amidst the carnage is a 25-year-old prince, breathless, his sword still heavy in his hand. He has just shattered the most feared army in the world and rewritten the destiny of mankind. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. History remembers him as the destroyer of nations, the man who turned Jerusalem to ash and dragged God's people away in chains. But there is a side to this predator that the history books rarely whisper about. How did the same hand that burned the Temple of Solomon build a city so advanced it wouldn't be rivaled for 2,000 years? To truly know the man, we must first look at the humiliation that forged him.
To understand the fire in Nebuchadnezzar's veins, you have to understand the shame of his father's house. For generations, Babylon wasn't the golden city of legend. It was a dog on a leash, trampled under the iron sandals of the Assyrians. These were the most brutal conquerors the Middle East had ever produced. In 629 BC, the Assyrian king Sennacherib grew so tired of Babylonian defiance that he committed the unthinkable. He didn't just conquer the city, he erased it. He tore down the holy temples, diverted the river to flood the ruins, and left the oldest city in Mesopotamia to rot in the mud as a swamp. He declared it would never rise again. But empires always make the same mistake. They underestimate the memory of a humiliated people. While the ruins of Babylon festered, a family was waiting in the shadows. Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, was a man with no royal blood, a general described in ancient clay tablets simply as the son of a nobody. But in 626 BC, he saw his opening. As Assyria tore itself apart from within, this nobody seized the throne of a broken city. It was the beginning of a 15-year total war. In a relentless campaign of blood and fire, Nabopolassar and his allies cornered the Assyrians in their capital, Nineveh. When the walls finally breached, the destruction was so absolute that 200 years later, when Greek explorers passed by, they didn't even recognize the mounds of dirt as the capital of a once mighty empire. It was on these fresh bones of the Assyrian Empire that Nebuchadnezzar stepped onto the stage of history. He wasn't just a prince, he was a weapon forged by his father to finish a job that was only half done. Because while Assyria was dead, a new predator had moved into the neighborhood, Egypt. Pharaoh Necho II had marched north to claim the power vacuum, turning Jerusalem and the surrounding kingdoms into Egyptian puppets. Nabopolassar was now old and failing, his strength spent in the mud of Nineveh. He handed the sword of command to his son, and in 605 BC, at the Battle of Carchemish, the young prince didn't just win, he obliterated the Egyptian dream of empire. The pharaoh fled, never to leave his borders again, as Nebuchadnezzar chased the survivors for hundreds of miles. The world was at his feet, but then a message arrived from the east that changed everything. His father was dead. The throne of Babylon sat empty, and every mile he spent chasing Egyptians was a mile a rival could use to steal his crown. In a move of staggering decisiveness, he handed his army and his thousands of prisoners to his generals and took off across the burning desert with only a small escort. He covered hundreds of miles in just weeks, and on September 7th, 605 BC, he sat on the throne of Babylon. For the next 43 years, he would transform a regional power into a civilization that defies imagination. But winning a throne is easy. Building a world is another matter entirely. While most kings spent their gold on more blood, Nebuchadnezzar spent it on stone, glaze, and water. He inherited a city that was merely respectable and turned it into the center of the universe. He built walls so massive that 2 four-horse chariots could pass each other at full gallop on top of them. He designed a triple-layered defensive system, baked brick, compacted earth, and a deep moat fed by the Euphrates that made Babylon practically invincible. If you wanted to conquer his city, you didn't just face an army, you faced a mountain of engineering that no technology of the era could hope to pierce. Inside those walls, Nebuchadnezzar was painting a vision that did not belong to the ancient world. Most cities of 600 BC were brown, dust-choked and stagnant. Babylon was a sapphire. He coated his monuments in glazed bricks of deep cobalt blue, brilliant gold, and bone white. The Ishtar Gate, the ceremonial heart of the city, rose 45 feet high, shimmering like a jewel under the Mesopotamian sun. To walk through it was to be humbled by the roar of 120 silent lions, molded in relief and glazed in vivid colors. This wasn't just architecture, it was psychological warfare. Before a foreign king could even speak to Nebuchadnezzar, he had to walk a mile through a blue and gold gauntlet that whispered, "You are nothing." But while he built for power, he also built for life. In an era when most of humanity lived in filth, Nebuchadnezzar's engineers designed a subterranean sewage system with covered drains that flushed waste into the river. They bridged the mighty Euphrates by diverting its very current, setting stone pillars on a dry bed before letting the waters return, a feat of civil engineering that Rome wouldn't match for centuries. And then there were the hanging gardens. Legend tells us they weren't built for pride, but for love. His queen, Amadis, pined for the green mountains of her home in the north. So Nebuchadnezzar brought the mountains to her. He built tiered terraces, an artificial forest in the desert, using massive Archimedes screws to defy gravity and pump water to the summit. Yet, for all his beauty and brilliance, the predator never truly slept. While the water cascaded over his wife's gardens, Nebuchadnezzar was sharpening his gaze towards a tiny, stubborn kingdom in the mountains of Judah. He didn't hate Jerusalem. He did not care about their God. To him, the destruction of the holy city was not a holy war. It was a failed political experiment. He gave the kings of Judah chance after chance to bend the knee, but they chose to listen to the empty promises of Egypt. And when a predator like Nebuchadnezzar is betrayed, he doesn't just punish, he erases. The final blow to Jerusalem was not a sudden storm. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. King Zedekiah, a man Nebuchadnezzar himself had placed on the throne, ignored the desperate warnings of the prophet Jeremiah. He believed the whispers of Egypt over the reality of the Babylonian war machine. In 589 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's patience finally evaporated. He marched his army to the gates of Jerusalem and sat there for 18 months. Inside the walls, hunger turned to madness. Outside, the king of the world waited with the cold precision of a mathematician. When the walls finally breached in 586 BC, there was no mercy left in the Babylonian heart. The city was systematically dismantled. Solomon's temple, the spiritual heart of the Jewish people, was stripped of its gold and burned until its stones cracked from the heat. But here is where the story takes its most surprising turn. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just a butcher. He was a collector. He didn't just kill the people of Judah. He harvested them. He took the craftsmen, the blacksmiths, the artists, and the young nobility like Daniel and his friends, and transplanted them into the beating heart of his empire. Archaeological records from 1893 prove this. In the ruins of Babylon, excavators found ration lists, bureaucratic records of grain and oil, and among the names was Jehoiakim, the exiled king of Judah. He wasn't in a dungeon. He was a guest of the state, living in a golden prison while his people wept by the rivers of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC, leaving behind a city that would remain a symbol of human achievement for millennia. He was a man of impossible contradictions, a military genius who preferred the trowel to the sword, a brutal conqueror who built a mountain for a homesick wife, and a destroyer who inadvertently preserved the very culture he tried to absorb. When we look at the ruins of Babylon today,
we aren't just looking at the dust of a tyrant. We are looking at the proof that the same hand capable of the greatest destruction is often the only one capable of the greatest creation.